All right, let's dive into a business paradox that kind of flips everything we think we know about wealth, power, and innovation completely on its head. And yeah, it all kicks off in China.
Okay, get this. This whole thing starts with one mind-blowing stat from Forbes. Are you ready? 9. Not one, not two, but 9 of the world's top 10 self-made female billionaires are from China. Just let that sink in for a second. 9 out of 10. So the big question is, in a country that has a notoriously complex environment for professional women, how on earth is that even possible?
Well, to even begin to unpack this, we've got to look back at the country's official ideology. You see, there was this famous phrase, women hold up half the sky. And this wasn't just some catchy slogan, you know? It was a core principle from the Mao era that basically set up a culture where it was completely normal for women to work. It was the standard, not the exception.
But, and there's a big but here, that ideal runs headfirst into some pretty tough realities. So yeah, dual-income households are the norm, but women still get hit with what's called the motherhood penalty, where their careers just seem to stall out after they have kids. It got so bad, some women even resorted to the hidden marriage phenomenon, literally hiding their marital status from their bosses just to avoid getting passed over for a promotion. And on top of all that, there's this very, very real corporate glass ceiling. And when you look at the data, that glass ceiling isn't just a metaphor. It's crystal clear. Back in 2019, women held just under 11% of board seats in China. That's way behind both the US and Europe. So obviously that whole holding up half the sky ideal wasn't quite making it into the corner office.
And this pattern, it shows up in paychecks too. You see, for lower and middle income jobs, the gender pay gap is tiny, almost non-existent. But the second you look at that top 10%, the highest paying senior roles, that gap becomes a canyon. It's not about just getting your foot in the door. It's about being locked out of the penthouse suite.
So here's our paradox, right? On one hand, you've got this incredible, world-leading success at the billionaire level. But on the other, you have these massive systemic barriers in the corporate world. So how did they do it? Let's take a look at the actual women who figured out how to navigate this maze. Okay, first up, Lu Qing. On paper, she is the definition of an insider. Her dad founded Lenovo, she went to Harvard, had this amazing career at Goldman Sachs, but here's the twist. Instead of just climbing that safe corporate ladder, she took a huge gamble on a scrappy, struggling ride-sharing startup called Didi, and get this, the founder initially didn't even want to hire her.
And talk about timing. She joined at a moment that was totally make or break for the company. Uber was about to crash into the Chinese market, and Didi was bleeding money in a price war with its biggest local rival. An investor comes along and says, hey, the only way out is a merger. But the two founders just hated each other. So in steps Lu Qing. With her background, her reputation, she was this neutral, respected voice. She managed to broker the deal, basically saving both companies. And then, as president, she led the newly merged giant to beat Uber in China. What a masterclass in strategy.
All right, now let's look at a totally different story. This is Peng Lei, one of Alibaba's original co-founders. And what's fascinating is that unlike pretty much everyone else who was totally captivated by Jack Ma's huge vision, she wasn't a believer. She actually saw him as timid, and she made it her job to be his reality check, the person who would always tell him the unvarnished truth. So back in 2010, Jack Ma tasks her with fixing their payment system Alipay, which she had publicly called rotten. And what was the problem? Well, the user experience was just an absolute nightmare. It had this insane 7-step verification process that was so complicated people were just giving up halfway through a purchase. It was grinding the business to a halt. And this is where her genius just shines through. See, she wasn't a tech person or a finance whiz. She was an expert in the user. First thing she did, she changed the team's goal. She said, forget about the total transaction value. From now on, your only metric is the payment completion rate. Brilliant, right? It forced everyone to solve the customer's real problem. Then, she took on the risk herself, convincing Alibaba to guarantee any fraud losses so the banks would agree to simplify the process. And finally, she launched Yue Bao, all based on this simple, fair idea. If Alipay is earning interest on your money, shouldn't you get a piece of that? That one idea completely changed the game and turned Alipay into a giant. Okay, so we've seen an insider who rewrote the rules and a co-founder who fixed a totally broken system. But this next story, this is about a group of women who just threw the entire rulebook out the window. They invented a whole new way to build a business, basically from the outside in. So, let's talk about Wang Babo. It's a healthy oatmeal brand. In 2020, just 2 years after it launched, it raked in over 10 million yuan.
That's about $1.5 million in the very first hour of the huge Singles Day sale. It became #1 in its entire category. Just insane.
So how in the world did 3 female founders pull off that kind of explosive growth? Well, they did it by flipping the traditional business model completely on its head. See, they didn't start with a product, they started with a market.
Okay, here's their playbook. Step 1, they used their social media accounts to build an audience first. Step 2, they listened to that audience. They analyzed the data and found this core conflict, this unmet need. I love to eat, but I'm so afraid of getting fat. Step 3, then, and only then, did they create the perfect product to solve that exact problem. A really tasty baked oatmeal that felt like a treat but was still healthy. And finally, step 4, they used this really smart, multi-layered influencer strategy to get the word out.
And honestly, their budget just tells you everything you need to know. A full 2/3 of their early marketing money went straight to influencers. You know how much went to traditional media like TV or print? Zero. Absolutely nothing. They just got that in today's world, community and trust are way more powerful than a billboard. They built the market long before they ever built a factory.
So you've got the elite insider, the skeptical co-founder, and the team of market builders. What do all these different stories really tell us about innovation itself? What's the common thread here?
Well, it all points to this really powerful central thesis. True game-changing innovation, it hardly ever comes from the established center of power. It's almost always born on the edges, created by people who are outside those traditional structures.
And in China, you can see this pattern so clearly. The real drivers of innovation are often students, young and scrappy companies, and, of course, women, the very groups who aren't bogged down by the old traditional ways of doing things.
And that right there brings us full circle, back to the paradox we started with. The very same glass ceilings, the same structural roadblocks that make the traditional corporate path so tough for many women, well, those are the exact forces that push them, that force them to be more creative. When the main road is blocked, you don't just give up. You have to invent a whole new one.
So, this leaves us with a really provocative final thought. If true innovation always comes from the outsiders, then maybe, to see what's coming next, to really see the future, we shouldn't be looking at the center of power at all. Maybe we should be watching the periphery.